Okay, free speech. So these are the questions. The questions in bold I'm going to go over in the brief little presentation, and then offline after the recording, we shall get into some of these little discussion questions that are not bolded. So what is free speech in the US? What's covered legally? What type of speech is covered legally? So there's some history to the First Amendment and some Supreme Court decisions that have interpreted that amendment. So the First Amendment itself, I suppose I could just read, I think it's pretty brief, so let me try to find it here.
We're reading the Constitution this time?
Yeah, some of it. Yes, it's brief.
We got to catch up with you, Kyle.
Yeah, read the Bill of Rights, man.
You made us look bad. You made us
Kyle's
look
just
really
giving a
bad.
kick out of everything today.
We've all memorized it. Okay, so First Amendment reads, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So there's a lot in that, more than just free speech. It's got freedom of religion, freedom of the press, etc. So for our purposes of freedom of speech, it's just saying Congress shall make no law respecting freedom of speech is basically what it's saying for our subject. So the wiki, yes, Jim?
It said a bridge.
Huh?
What did it say about freedom of speech?
Oh man, you're gonna make me find it again.
Yes.
Congress shall make no law
Prohibiting.
respecting. Oh, Congress shall make no law respecting abridging the freedom of speech. Right. Yeah, you're right.
Abridging the freedom of speech. Right.
No
Yep.
law abridging the freedom of speech, along with all the other,
Okay.
right to assembly and all that.
Is it infringing?
It's not
Congress shall
saying
make no law respecting.
so this is just a little wiki summary here. Basically says what I just read. So the wiki summary of what free speech means is the free and public expression of opinions without censorship, interference, or restraint by the government. The term freedom of speech is embedded in the First Amendment, and it encompasses the decision what to say as well as what not to say. Free press means the right of individuals to express themselves through publication and dissemination of information, ideas, and opinions without interference, constraint, or prosecution by the government. So we can say stuff without the government retaliating against us, and we can refrain from saying stuff, again, without the same penalties. So some Supreme Court decisions relating to this amendment that have helped flesh out exactly what it does and doesn't cover. This goes in chronological order of kind of some of the big important rulings regarding free speech. So the first here being Schenck v. the United States. This is where a guy or some guys were distributing some anti-draft pamphlets encouraging young men to resist the draft. And then Holmes, the guy who wrote the Supreme Court opinion, said that the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. So basically they said, we can stop you from giving out these anti-draft pamphlets because of this whole notion of clear and present danger. Your speech in this circumstance is of a nature to where it would create a clear and present danger, the very thing that Congress is established to prevent.
So you have a link there.
This just is a wiki page fleshing out what clear and present danger,
So basically,
that phrase means.
So basically, they decided that you couldn't, that there were certain things that you couldn't hand out or say or do that would harm the home country.
Right. If your words are bringing out, direct danger to the United States, or presumably to other people, that the government has a right to prevent that kind of speech.
That's just a case, right? It's not from the Constitution.
Right. It would be, and I learned actually a lot about like what the Supreme Court does, what it doesn't do. Like these legal cases are supposed to be cases where they're interpreting the Constitution. Now, a lot of people would say in many cases they're actually kind of changing it or adding nuances and shades to it. But it is, that I think the right way of technically expressing it would be this is a legal case where they put out an opinion expressly interpreting that amendment, and so it's going to naturally inform all other cases going forward. They're going to look back and say, well, look, the Supreme Court interpreted it this way, so we better keep with that interpretation. So that was 1919, and then in Gitlow versus New York in 1925. This is a case where this guy published some sort of left-wing manifesto, and he was prosecuted by the state for advocating direct overthrow of the government. And this is where I learned about, so there's the 14th Amendment, which I can read, just specifically section 1 of the 14th Amendment kind of changed some things. Let's see here, gotta read Roman numerals. Gotta love it. Section 1 of the 14th Amendment reads, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So what does that have to do with free speech? Doesn't seem to have any direct implication, but the implication in that amendment, it says that states don't have the right to restrict certain rights and liberties. So actually, the way I was when I was studying, the way I kind of read it was this case, up until this case, there's maybe a sense in the air that states had some sort of power to restrict free speech. Like, we're in a republic, and so the states have certain powers, and the federal government should have as little power as possible. And so in general, it was kind of viewed that the states have some kind of leeway to kind of do what they want with free speech. But this case, the opinion made in this case said, well, no, look at the 14th Amendment. The states, if there's a certain right granted to individuals by the federal government, the states can't limit that right. And so this was just kind of a big case to really limit states' action against free speech. Last important case here, Brandenburg versus Ohio, jumping all the way to 1969. You'll hear a lot about this if you do some research into free speech. So this is a case where the court held that the government cannot punish inflammatory speech unless that speech is directed to inciting or promoting imminent lawless action and is likely to incite or produce such action. So this is sort of a new shade to the interpretation of the First Amendment that was given up here. So it moved from clear and present danger, which was the keyword there, danger, to now it's not just that the government can punish speech that may result in direct danger, but also just if it directly incites or produces lawless action. So, if you're telling people to go and steal or go and do fraud, voter fraud or something, right. So it's not danger, it's not physical violence, but it's lawless action. And so that's kind of the newest norm for free speech restriction. So what's not covered under US free speech? This is easiest just to follow
Control
this link
click link to
here.
follow. Now you gotta share your screen again.
Okay, so what speech is not protected by the First Amendment? So I think it starts here. Yeah, some examples described below. So fighting words. This one's funny. I I don't think anyone quite knows exactly what fighting words mean, but if it's something that's intended to incite violence or encourage an audience to commit illegal acts, that can be restricted or prohibited by the government here.
Them's fighting words.
Yeah, obscenity. So obscenity is protected by the First Amendment here, but it's got to be, if the government's going to do anything about obscenity, it's got to be like a super high threshold. So we're talking, pornography, just things that, I think this is kind of interesting, things that are considered patently offensive based on contemporary community standards, and they lack serious literary, scientific, or artistic value. Child pornography can be restricted, libel and slander. So you can say lies about people, but the government's not going to protect you from being sued if you spread such lies. Crimes involving speech. So, perjury, extortion, harassment, those are crimes. It's not just speech, it's actual crimes that are being committed there. Threats aren't protected. Violation of copyright rules, conduct regulations. So like when you're putting up posters, they can regulate the size, and if you got a amplifying device, they can regulate how loud it goes. And then commercial speech doesn't have nearly as many protections if it's commercials, things like that. Okay. So that's the stuff not covered in the US. So number 2 was really important to me, figuring out, well, how does this stack up against other countries? Like, what's unique about free speech in the US? I've heard, I've heard before, like, America's the only place with, legitimate free speech or whatever. It's the best place for free speech. And
Yeah.
I'd never really looked much up into it, but yeah, my research, it's definitely it's the country with the most free speech protections. I haven't heard, there's only one attempt to say otherwise, and it was based on statistics using not just like legal protections, constitutional protections, things like that, but it was including how comfortable people feel like expressing themselves, and things like that were factored into the tally. And so US was like way down low somewhere. I'm like, this is weird. So I looked up the things they use for those numbers. But yeah, everything I've really seen from people of all different stripes have agreed the US definitely has the most official protections for speech. Namely, it's constitutionally protected. So, the Constitution is sort of the bedrock of American government, and in order to change it, it's like the whole world has to be in agreement. Everyone and their mom's got to sort of get on board with changing the Constitution, and that's where our free speech rights are embedded. And that's, from what I understand, is what's unique about Americans' free speech. Is other countries might have some, but they're very provisional. It's like at any time, at the whim of the leaders, that can be changed or restricted and things like that. So I thought that was super cool. I was kind of thinking, I think it was this morning, I was just thinking, like, if you gave me 2 options to live in 2 different countries and I knew nothing about them, literally nothing, except one has, you can say whatever you want without being persecuted by the government, and the other one not so much. So blindly, I would right away, I'd choose the one where you can say whatever you want without being persecuted by the government. So that's just kind of an interesting fact about.
But that also
American free
depends.
speech.
That also depends on what purse the other country has, where there's not as much free speech.
No, I know, but just going in blind and just knowing only those 2 things, I would every time I'd go with the one with free speech, because it just seems that important.
Yeah, fair point.
Okay, so how does this relate to social media? It seems like an eternity since the Elon Musk Twitter thing. No one cares anymore about that. It was like 1 week ago, this was the hottest topic and everyone was excited, and now it's all onto the whole Supreme Court Roe v. Wade possible overturn. So still, it's an exciting question, is how does free speech relate to social media? And from everything I've seen, no one really quite knows. Social media is so new. that basically the question is like, well, is it a platform? Meaning, is it, you know, just like, you know, a sidewalk, you know, where people, it's just, people come and they say whatever they want? Or is it private business? Is it, you know, getting off the sidewalk and going into someone's business and saying whatever you want? That's definitely a totally different situation. You know, obviously social media companies are businesses, but at the same time, they seem to kind of act like these platforms. So there's, I guess there's just sort of a lot of uncertainty, and I heard a couple people compare, like, universities are kind of similar, where some of them are, you know, they're businesses. I mean, you know, a university like what we're in right now, University of Nebraska Omaha, it is a public school, but it's also a business. It wants to get more and more students in. It's very monetarily driven, and so it has an incentive to do what the students want. So if the students want to restrict speech in some ways, they're going to kind of want to do that, but at the same time, they're sort of publicly funded, and so, you know, in these two instances, it's sort of like, what do you do? But especially social media is tough because there's to regulate it like a publisher, which is sort of the debate, like, is Facebook, you know, like the New York Times, where they're publishing content and they're therefore somewhat responsible for that content, or are they a platform? The problem with considering them a publisher is
They can restrict whatever content they like.
Yeah.
they can, well, but if we consider them a publisher and therefore responsible for their content, the claim is like, how are they going to monitor their content? It's an almost unfathomable number of posts and things like that. So how do you actually, you know, the worry is that if we consider them an actual publisher, they're just going to die basically, and just, what are we going to do? You just crippled us. Like, we can't possibly monitor all of that stuff. And then on the flip side of that, if we say, well, it's just a platform and you can't monitor hardly, you know, you basically have to allow everything, then it's just going to turn into a terrible place to be. You know, the claim is no respecting person would want to be on a social media site where anything can be said, you know, pornography, just all of that stuff. And
Called
so
4chan.
so how do you balance that?
People still like 4chan.
That's true.
I found out what that was 2 weeks ago, actually.
I'm sorry.
Took you that long?
Yes,
I haven't been on there.
I lived under a rock.
So there's something called Section 230, which applies to social media companies, which Section 230 essentially, at this time, I believe it's still in place, gives social media companies immunity from that type of responsibility for the content on their site. I don't know all the nuances of that. I wouldn't be surprised if there were some,
What responsibility?
if there were some instances where that wasn't the case. But in general, this frees them from that kind of responsibility. So obviously, social media companies really love Section 230. They want this to
Regulating
remain in
speech.
place.
I think that's
Oh, it frees them from the responsibility of regulating speech.
yeah, of
Yes.
the consequences.
So like if I come on there and I recruit someone for, you know, tie-dye shirt hating,
I have a tie-dye
Group.
shirt too.
and we go around and we beat up tie-dye shirt wearing guys, Facebook's not responsible for that because they're just out there providing
I just
the
I
platform.
just got a tie-dye shirt, or I won one
Don't worry around
Better
the
watch out for the tie-dye hating group.
from a.
That's all three of us then. The three musketeers of tie-dye.
So this last point here is just to say, so as of right now, social media companies and what they do with posts, what they filter, what they don't filter, what they allow and don't allow, it isn't technically a First Amendment issue because right now they're sort of getting the best of both worlds. They have the privileges of being a platform. They can't be responsible for their content. And yet they can sort of restrict content in ways they see fit. So it isn't technically a First Amendment issue, but when people say, well, I'm concerned about free speech because of what's going on social media, it isn't fair to just say, well, that's not a free speech issue, because the point is it's the culture around free speech. When we stop caring about what social media companies are doing with people's speech. The idea is that just the general culture around being able to say what you want to say, whether that is a specifically First Amendment issue or not, seems to be changing, and we should be talking about that. So that kind of gets into, well, okay, so people like me, I love free speech. I'm gonna go live in the country with the most free speech possible because I just think that's so important. This culture that does seem to be shifting towards being suspicious of free speech, and people who talk about free speech and people who promote it. What are their concerns? What's going on? Isn't it such a great thing? Why would we, for a moment, question the value of being able to speak freely? So those concerns briefly, and this can maybe prompt some of the conversations. Some of the concerns are hate speech and misinformation. I'm going to kind of treat these together, even though they're kind of different things. So hate speech, just being, hateful speech, just saying, I hate people that wear tie-dye shirts. I don't care who you are. You're a rotten bunch of so-and-so, that's hate speech. And then misinformation would be, people who wear tie-dye shirts are, naturally more handsome than other people. And that's why I want them, gone because I'm ugly and I want to, be seen as not so ugly. And so it's like, well, it's just not true. Statistically, that's misinformation. And so with these two things, this point here, the concerns about these two things, hate speech and misinformation, is not necessarily that it's, meets either the clear and present danger or even the imminent unlawful action requirements, I guess you could say, of those previous Supreme Court opinions. But it's kind of this new standard of, well, these things, if you put enough of this stuff out here, if you put enough misinformation or you put enough hateful speech out there, there's going to eventually be this, it's kind of a causally uncertain, but it certainly is correlated, massive negative effect, and it relates to either morals, culture, beliefs, or safety. So we're not saying there's like some sort of a direct one-to-one cause, not necessarily saying it's always going to result in actual danger or lawlessness, but it's just in general, you put out enough false information and it's going to change the culture in negative ways. It's going to change people's beliefs, and sometimes it is going to affect safety, and so that's the concern there. Also from kind of free speech suspicious folks, you're going to hear probably free speech is not the same thing as freedom from consequences of that speech. And so what this means is, well, you have free speech. It's just, if you say the types of things that you're trying to say, lots and lots of people are going to stop you from saying that and maybe hurt your life, your career and things like that. And that's just a consequence of you saying what you said. You had free speech and you suffered the consequences because you said something that a good chunk of people didn't like, and they did something about it. And so you suffered a consequence. So you'll hear that. So I also heard this, more speech is actually like less speech. So if you opened up a platform like say Facebook and literally just turned the button on and let people go, some of the argument against something like that is, well, you're going to get this just nasty mass of people, and they want to, just troll and be, immoral, and they just want to spread nasty crap and porn and just all kinds of stuff. And it's actually going to drown out just the regular folks who want to express their opinion. So by having this more speech approach, saying, well, let's just let everyone speak, people are actually going to shut up and stop speaking and stop coming to that platform, and there will actually end up being less speech. You'll hear the right to speak is not the same as the right to be heard. So it kind of goes with this consequence thing where, you have the right to speak, but that doesn't mean you have the right to be given a platform to speak. So, sure, Micah, you can say what you want to say about Hinduism and violence, but you can't speak here at the university. You can't get on any of the major social platforms, and no self-respecting publisher will put in writing anything you said.
Dude, I was actually working on a paper relating to that earlier today, so that's so
I know you were.
coincidental that you said that.
I know you were.
So
So
how'd you know? Did I tell you? Or
Spied on you.
I said the Hinduism and martial arts paper. So.
so that's the view, that's the idea there. So well, look, you have the right to speak, but no one has to listen to you, and no one has to kind of give you their ear. And then this one here. So there are certain historically marginalized people groups, and we need to lift those groups up. And sometimes that means the privileged groups are going to be stifled a little because we need to correct the balances. So it is free speech. It's equitable speech where there's a certain group of people throughout time who've not had a voice. So now they need to have a larger voice. And some of those privileged folks need to sort of be a quieter or less prevalent voice. Last one here is basically the equivalence with speech and power. So there are those in power, and if those in power are the ones who get to speak, they're the ones who most often have the largest audience. They continue to gain power because speech is power, and so they gain more speech, gaining more power, keeping themselves in power, keeping the underprivileged and powerless voiceless. And so when free speech is actually free, it's really only free for the powerful, and everyone else is kind of unheard. So let's make it less free. That is, let's make it let's intentionally dispense free speech in a way that's seen as fair by whoever's doing the dispensing, so that it's more evenly divided, more fairly divided. So that's kind of some of the concerns on that side. And I'll shut up here pretty soon. Just wanted to share some of these free, some of these good resources. I use Wiki a lot. No shame in using Wiki. Start with something like the First Amendment, and then just go down rabbit holes. So you click First Amendment, and you just click on all these different cases, and you'll learn a lot by just letting yourself go down rabbit holes.
That's what they say in conspiracy land.
I guess John Stuart Mill is kind of a classic on this, on liberty. He really lays out kind of the classic and strongest argument for free speech, and for it being the strongest form of free speech possible. This Jonathan Haidt guy came up quite a lot in some of the videos I was looking on. He's got this book called Coddling of the American Mind. He's got a lot of good stuff to say. By the name of that, you can tell he's probably very much on the pro free speech side. This Jeffrey Stone came up a few times. He's not, so he's kind of balanced. He's maybe centrist, or he's got a very, I wouldn't call him like just this absolute free speech no matter what type of guy. Neil Richards, I don't even remember. I know I jotted him down because he seemed kind of like a pretty well-known figure in free speech land. And then YouTube. YouTube is an awesome source for learning stuff.
And distracting yourself.
Not if you do it the right way, my brother. So I have 70 videos in my free speech playlist. I can share this if you want.
I watched too.
So if you just go through YouTube and search like First Amendment, or comparative free speech in US, compared, et cetera, and then just pull the videos that you think are going to be actually helpful and not just sound bites. I prioritize, panels, debates, things where multiple sides get a voice, or things like this, that are clearly just like teaching something. They're being a little bit just didactic about it. They're not being necessarily persuasive. There's kind of going over information. So that's my big playlist, and then I've got a best of here. I shared this to the Facebook group. This playlist, I would really recommend going through this. Yeah, this is the best playlist I shared.
That one.
This
Why
one here.
millennials hate free speech and what to do about
Okay,
it.
maybe I didn't read
That's
that.
alarming that millennials hate free speech.
I watched 3 of them out of here.
If I could recommend one, I would recommend this one here from Intelligence Squared, The Battle Over Free Speech. This one has 4 speakers.
Triggered.
It's basically two speakers from both sides, and I think this one gives the best sense of the current discussion, like in the culture. A lot of these are kind of academic. Free speech is a legal issue, so a lot of them are I don't know. They're not so much what's the culture around free speech, but what are some of the the history and the legalities of it. But this one here, the battle over free speech, is very much what should we as a culture be thinking about free speech? How should we feel about it? Should we be for it? Should we be against it? So you really have, I think you really understand both sides from this particular video. So I love that one. This final one here actually has like a higher up rep from Facebook, and then 3 other panelists that all kind of have sort of different views there. This one goes over to John Stuart Mill here.
He was the philosopher, right?
Yep, he's a philosopher.
Was.
So yeah, I definitely recommend this playlist, but especially this video I think is great. And just in general, I want to end by encouraging people to do studies, because last few studies I've done, I've been amazed at how much information is out there. You know, between YouTube and Wiki and all of this stuff, you can learn so much. So we spend a lot of time doing junk, Netflix and God knows what else. YouTube. It's like amazing how in a week, you can like learn so much about a certain topic. So it's not that hard. You don't have to, I feel like I went through my bachelor, program really overwhelmed by research and thinking like you had to, always go onto these academic journal databases to start out with, and like you don't. You can just YouTube it and just find.
Or read books in the
YouTube
library.
has like academics, and it's got the big names on pretty much any subject you're going to want to study. They're out there on YouTube, so it's a good place to start. Of just dinking around on the internet and just let yourself be obsessed with it for a week, and I think you'll be kind of amazed at what you learn. So that's just kind of my final encouragement, and I'll stop talking and we can discuss.